Welcome everyone to the S3D seminar for today. Thanks for coming. It's an unusual day, but we have Ulrik Pagh Schultz Lundquist here visiting us. Thank you. I did my best.
Yes.
He's visiting from the University of Southern Denmark, where he's a professor and the head of center, the head of a drone center there doing research. I'm very pleased. He's actually visiting us today through Wednesday. So if you're interested in talking, please come up afterwards or send email to one of us, and I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with people. But I'm excited because he combines some strengths of our department. So I have known Ulrik for a long time in the programming language community, where he works on domain specific languages. But now he's been working on this project, the WildDrone Marie Curie Network, where he works on the design and implementation of aerial, mobile, and self-organizing robotic systems, or drones, with a focus on the use of high-level software abstractions to achieve safety, reliability, and robustness. And there's lots of interesting applications of these drones, including conservation, which I think connects a lot with our societal computing emphases here in the department as well. So. Thank you, Ulrik, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thanks for the introduction. I forgot to ask, by the way, how long is the talk supposed to be?
Oh, yes, I should have prepared you, I suppose.
No problem. I can talk like, I can do this in 10 minutes or 2 hours as you
Professors are capable, right?
Yes.
So I would say maybe a talk for a little less than an hour,
Yes.
Finish up around 1 or a little before 1, and if we have questions that might go a little past the hour, that's great.
Yeah.
We have the room till 1:15 or so.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. And thanks for hosting me here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah. I'm very happy to be here and talk about, I actually, when I came here, I asked Jonathan if we should talk about the stuff I did previously, which is in programmed languages and robotics, or if I should talk about what I'm doing now and sort of my future thing, which is more in applying some of these things in the nature conservation domain, and we went for the latter. And in fact, in my talk, I ended up thinking it, because somehow the whole thing, this is actually the agenda for my talk, so it can keep going for a long time, as you can see. But I'll start with talking a little bit about robots and programming languages, which is where I'm coming from, because I thought that would be good to also link up here. This is, after all, a place where there's a lot of things going on in that area. Then I'll talk about drones and nature conservation, why, and how did I get sort of caught up in this. And then I'll talk about the WildDrone project, which is my personal dream project that I'm super excited to be working on. And then I'll connect that again to what we're doing and the kinds of problems that we see in aerial robots and programming languages. And then I'll stop it, and we can keep the conversation going around in circles. So, if the preamble and what I've been working with actually since 2005, when I moved to the University of Southern Denmark, is robots and programming languages. And I actually had different plans when I came there. I was working with partial evaluations, so program specialization, program analysis, program transformation. But then there were all these robots, and when I looked at how they were programming the robots, this is back in 2005. It has gotten a little bit better, but not much. It was like, oh, this is for programming language researchers. This is excellent because they're writing so much, useful but garbage, ultimately C code, one-shot programs because that's what solved the problem. But why were they doing this? I mean, these are smart people, but it's just really hard to write software for robotic systems. And it's something that I then started working with. And there's so many concerns that are difficult. There's a natural kind of, because they're physical devices, machines that are in the real world, there's naturally often concurrency. There's a lot of uncertainty in the domain they're working with sensors and actuators can be very unpredictable. And real time is actually important here in the sense that, well, when there's a physical world with you, then you have to move at an appropriate pace or do things at an appropriate pace, otherwise it doesn't work. And I'm again go back a little bit in time. I think from thinking about the good old programming language paradigms at the beginning, and how do we program our robots? Well, of course, we can use what we could call manual programming, just writing our standard programming code in C++ or Python, which is of course used a lot. there's always been an interest in what we sometimes refer to automatic programming. So using logic languages was a big thing some 20 years ago. Now it's much more AI and using that to program robots to do various things. I'll touch a little bit on that. Software architecture is thankfully getting better in robotics in some ways. There's Rust, which I guess most people have heard about, and to me it's like, I mean, I feel like we failed them actually because the robotics people, because it's like the JavaScript of robotics. Just like JavaScript is a horrible language but does the job, Rust is a horrible middleware but does the job. And Rust 2 is better, but still, I mean, someone really needs to do something there. But I'm not going to talk about that here. We can talk about it later. I do want to touch a little bit on AI, and I'd like to confess myself as I think a large language model skeptic. I mean, I think they're nice for what they're being used for, but I think they're also massively being oversold at the moment in terms of capabilities. I'm not going to talk a lot about it here, but I'm happy to discuss it as well, if you want to get into a discussion about that. And I think already early on, and I know it's of course these techniques are getting better and better, but I think we keep forgetting that the kinds of AI systems that we see, we often tend to see, well, they have really interesting capabilities. Well, then they can probably do what we expect them to do. And I'm sure you've seen this example as well before. You take an image which is classified as a truck, you add a little bit of random noise. To human, it looks the same. To the image classifier, it becomes a completely different thing. It will classify this truck as an ostrich. And there's, of course, that prompted a whole wave of new research on how to counter these things. But to me, it's I think a reminder that, well, this is not the same kind of intelligence as we have. And it does interesting things, but there are also often things that it does not do very well. And I think we need, if we think that artificial intelligence is going to automatically derive all the robot behaviors for us, going to instruct our robots for how to behave in the real world, I think that's wrong. And I think we need to see what is the role of programming languages there. And that's something that I'll touch on now, and I'll get back to that later as well. And in general, what is the good way to use AI in such a context? And I do have a need for it. I've sort of gone back to it, and I'll touch on that as well later once I've told you about the WildDrone project. But from my point of view, if we are programming things, and I'm a program language researcher, so I like thinking about what are the languages that we have available. And I think it's really important, in particular, when we think about robots that we're programming in terms of movement, they're machines that move around in a physical world, and we might have constraints about safety, or we might need to reason about time and how long time does something take. Then it becomes really important, what are the abstractions we have available in our language? And when we are in our general purpose language, like C++ or even Python or something, I feel like we are sort of the blind men with the elephant trying to figure out what is this thing, because we don't have language that lets us express, for example, in most languages, how much time something takes. Something as basic as time, it's something that is really important in the physical world, but we often lack abstractions to talk about it. Safety is a crucial property for many real-world robotic systems, but it's often hidden away in many different parts of the program, as opposed to being something that we actually have words for in our language. And I think that's a problem when we try to program these complex robotic systems. So what I'm really interested in from a program language point of view is, well, if we build our software thinking about Rust or something similar, we build it in terms of components. We can have some model-driven approach to composing these, describing at a high level what we want. We can use our general purpose language to implement the components. But how do we actually implement those more difficult parts of the component? So something like safety, that's a cross-cutting property. We go back to aspect-oriented programming, which I think was the thing. I think it's kind of not so much anymore. If there's recent things happening there, I'd be delighted to hear about it. And then how do we also, if it's a large and complicated system, how do we actually describe this? And this is where as Jonathan had said in the introduction, well, I really like domain-specific languages. That's been something that has worked well for me in a robotics context, and often coupled together with program generation, because often we work with resource-constrained devices, and it's been something where it was really important that we could have real-time, high performance, not necessarily because it needs to be fast, but because it needs to respect real-time constraints, and also maybe not so much memory available, maybe the amount of communication bandwidth is limited. And domain-specific languages can be useful for specifying at a high level what you want, and then provided you can get the code generator right, then generate code that matches those requirements. So I've enjoyed that a lot. And again here, this in thinking about what are the words that we have, I'm quoting here a Danish, I guess, philosopher, Grundtvig. An important part, we have big thinking in our whole school system and everything actually, but he has this quote that I like, the word grace, what it mentions. If in a language, for example, for safety, if you have words, keywords that somehow are about the safety of the system, it makes you more likely to express properties about the safety of the system. And so I think domain-specific languages are interesting for working in a domain like this. How do we make domain-specific languages? Well, it's just compilers, really. I mean, and we know how to do that for many years. A big question is then what to do with them, how to design and really use domain-specific languages. And this is actually then the talk that I'm not going to talk about. So, but if I just wanted to mention them, if some of you are curious about it, and want to talk to me about it, I did work with different kinds of robots, trying to experiment with this, trying to figure out what are the right kinds of languages for robots. So I work with sort of this is kind of like a swarming type system, a modular self-reconfigurable robot system. So one robot built up of many small robots. There's been a lot of work with it here at CMU as well in the robotics department. And the difficult thing here is, as with any swarming system, it could also be a swarm of drones if you wanted to. You want them to do a task as a whole, but you have to write programs ultimately that execute on each of the small units of the swarm. And how do you do that? It's just really, really difficult. And again, a code generation approach here allowed us to express high-level properties of the system and then generate code for each of the specific devices to work with it. We also work with what I like to call safety-oriented programming. So here are some examples of some safety critical systems. There's a feeding robot. This is a robot for pinning lines on a sports stadium, and this is an agricultural robot. So all of them are some larger machines, some larger than others. This is like 1 ton actually, so getting quite big, that moves around in essentially an open, unstructured environment. Kind of like self-driving cars, although a lot easier because usually there would not be people there and it's okay to stop if there are obstacles in the way. Although if you're in the middle of a cornfield, it can be hard to tell a corn stalk from a person in a reliable way. So there are difficulties there, but we work with how can we then express safety properties of these systems and in a language that's only focused on safety. And here we went for something, it doesn't have to be something anyone can write, but I did want the languages to be something a safety expert, so not a programmer, but something a safety expert could read. So readability of the programs, I think, was really important here. And we've had examples of this, so we will write down a safety specification. The specification is generated as code across the different devices that make up the robot, but it's also something that the safety expert can read. So that allows us to reason together about what should actually be the safety properties here. I also got into reversible programming for a while because we looked at having robots that can do small batch construction, so they would build things. So I'm from Denmark, and in Denmark we have really high wages, which means for a long time, maybe the same thing happened here. A lot of production went to, we outsourced that to other countries. Then we found out that was maybe a bad idea. And what's been interesting recently is that robots are actually, I don't know if the same thing is happening here in the US, but robots are actually bringing jobs back to Denmark because it's reducing. So these are not robots that will completely automate the production, because if you're doing a complex task, usually robots can't do the whole thing, but the robots can do the simple repetitive tasks, which are not good for people anyway, and make the people more productive. So we have an economic actually growth in Denmark based and employment increasing in companies that are employing robots, which is a nice thing. But one of the tasks I wanted to do was to have robots that can assemble things. So you could imagine assembling, I don't know, a food processor or something. I mean, a kitchen appliance of some kind. And they're actually a bit tricky to put together. And often people do that by hand. But then the idea was, well, okay, let's have robots and let's have a language where we can describe this. And also sort of high level semantically in terms of tasks, pick up this thing, put on top of that thing. And then there's this sort of, we got into, well, because I was working in reversible computing at the same time, which is this special notion of programming where programs are reversible. So whenever you write a program, you also get the inverse program together with it. So if you write a compression function and run it backwards, which the language can do, you get uncompression. So I thought, okay, let's try this on a robot. So if we write a program that builds something and run it backwards, can we have it unbuild it? So disassemble it, which actually in the end worked. It wasn't very useful for people who wasn't that excited about it for unbuilding things. I thought this would be great for recycling and save the world and everything. But in fact, it wasn't so useful in practice. What it was really good for was actually error correction. You could imagine trying to assemble something is kind of a little bit misaligned. Then, if you take it apart and put it together again, then sometimes it works. That works for robots as well. And then recently in drones, so I'm heading the drone center in the University of Southern Denmark. We do a lot of work experimental with drones. I started a bit theoretically, working with how to optimize sort of drones in the airspace. But then I kind of got caught up in, I don't know if it was a COVID thing or not. It was around the same time, but I don't know if that had any connection to it. But I did start thinking a lot more, what are the kinds of problems that I really want to be working with and want to be solving? And then I'd like to introduce you to this paper, which is from 2017. Some of you may have heard about it already, but we are in the middle of what many biologists call the sixth mass extinction. So sixth in the history of the planet Earth. There's been 5 times before where there's been a massive decline in species all over the world. I mean, these were catastrophic events like a meteor slamming into the Earth some 65 million years ago. That's what we're doing right now. Humans on planet Earth. I think that's bad. And there's both, it's sad that we are losing so many species, and sort of a problem that's probably sort of a bit underreported is that there's this concept that are called ecosystem services. So an ecosystem service can be sort of helping to manage water, so you don't have it flow everywhere, but it sort of stays when it rains. Reducing climate gases. So it's possible. We don't have a very good understanding of it yet, but we have examples demonstrated of how if an ecosystem breaks down because of a reduction in biodiversity, it can mean that there's been talk, for example, of in the Amazon forest is at some point it's going to collapse and the whole forest will sort of start dying because we've been mistreating it basically. And there's a strong dependence often between plants and animals, more than we sort of have often realized. So there's a lot of good arguments for worrying about biodiversity. And this study here, so this is showing how many animals are left by. It's actually that's like 176 sort of signal species. So it's not all animals, but it's vertebrate animals. And thankfully, if you look at somewhere like South America here, it's not too bad. There's actually a lot of biodiversity still left here. It doesn't mean everything is good, but it means there's still a chance to save South America. Africa, the Sahara Desert has, so this is over the past 200 years, a lot of animals that have become extinct there. There's still some places where it's actually good, but we have to work hard here. And this is where I'm from. This is Europe. And Denmark, which is supposed to be a nice and sort of environmentally conscious country, that's really like one of the worst places. And the reason why is that it's nice and green everywhere, but it's agriculture. And monoculture is not biodiversity. Farmers sometimes claim it is, but it's not. It's really terrible for animals to live there. So I thought, well, honestly, this is a big problem. So what can we do? What should we do? And the thing is, apart from removing all humans from Earth, which would be a valid solution, but I don't think that's the solution we want to advocate here. we need more information to figure out what to do. So as an example, in the EU, there's actually been a decision to allocate 20% of the surface area for biodiversity. And I think in Denmark, we're really struggling because we have at most 1% or something. I think actually maybe in the US here, it's less bad because you do have larger areas where there's there is actual biodiversity. I didn't bring I should have actually put up the North America map there as well. It's much better than Europe, but not good in any way either. So, but the thing is, what are the right places to select for biodiversity? We could take somewhere where it's really convenient for us to pick it, but it might not be the place that's going to give us a significant amount of biodiversity. We need to pick places that animals actually need. We're building lots of wind turbines, but if we build wind turbines in the places that the animals need for foraging, well, it's good for getting cheaper wind energy, but bad for biodiversity. And then something very practical is there's a lot of pressure, and this is here from Africa, but there's the same thing in Denmark. There's this conflict that happens sometimes in real time between humans and animals. And so what we need to be able to deal with this and begin to figure out what to do is information on where is it happening, what is the extent, and how much is it happening, what should we be doing? And we don't have a lot of information about this. A lot of information we have about biodiversity is based on manual observations, and we know that they can often be, we've seen examples of this, there's been studies, it can be an order of magnitude wrong in both directions. That's really bad as a basis for decisions. So I thought, okay, well, as someone who works in technology, and recently I have a whole bunch of people who work with me in the drone center, let's go and use drones here. Do we need drones? There's already a lot of solutions there. The simple one, which is the manual clicker for counting birds. It works for remembering how many birds you counted, but as I said, often an order of magnitude wrong. You look out the window of an airplane and think, oh, that's probably, I don't know if you didn't click 200 times. I don't actually know how they do that. But anyway, manual counting works, but to an extent. Satellites are, of course, excellent for doing lots of observations. They're not very good for counting animals. Maybe an elephant, but if it's a smaller animal we're concerned about, it's not very good. And they also sometimes go on the foliage and other things, which are a problem. Camera traps are really great for capturing data in a very specific place, and they're used a lot. But of course, they only sit in a very specific place and collect data there. There's also, as we talked about Jonathan just before, some very practical problems still in camera traps. There's surprisingly little work done to make them more intelligent in terms of selecting which data to capture. And people actually also, when they're deployed in many places, people actually have to go manually collect the data from them because the amount of data is too large to transmit over a satellite network. And in many places where they're deployed, it wouldn't go over a cellular network either. I think if I put them up in Denmark, that we have excellent 5G coverage almost everywhere. It's really nice, but there are no animals to monitor, so what's the point? This bird here has a really tiny GPS tag on the back. That's also nice for observing specific animals, but doesn't give us a lot of coverage in terms of how many animals are there of other kinds. What is the animal doing there? If it stops somewhere for a day, is it because of bad weather, or is it because it's an important place for foraging? Why is it stopping there? So again, we need more information. And we know that drones can actually do this better. So there's already back in 2016, we saw that, well, yeah, drones are actually pretty good for this. So lots of data, and when we use appropriate AI machine learning techniques, we can get this order of magnitude better precision in terms of counting. And obviously drones can also more easily reach many areas compared to a human walking there. But there's also lots of challenges still. I talked to so many people who use drones and tried them out, but are disappointed because, well, I can do the job kind of manually, but it's too much time for me to fly there, and the technology has many limitations still, and to manually go through all of this data is also a problem. And if it's a manually flown drone, basically a remote control plane, that means you have to be there and watch the drone the whole time. Legislation is often also a hindrance in some ways, that you're not allowed to fly it beyond BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight. Legislation in many places actually just says that the drone has to be safe, not kill people, which is actually a reasonable requirement. But the question is then, how is it interpreted, and are you allowed to fly? Right at this time, so as I'll tell you about in a second, we are working in Kenya. And right now, so a couple of years ago, there were lots of people I've talked to who were flying in Kenya, covering large areas, flying beyond the use of line of sight. The thing is, if you don't, you can only fly 500 meters in either direction. That gives you like a square kilometer, which is not a lot of data to collect. Whereas if the drone can fly freely, 10 kilometers in either direction, you get much more data and there's much more to work with. Right now, it's really hard to get permission to do this in Kenya because, well, they're concerned in many countries about the safety implications of drones. I actually talked to many people in the US who work here, where they used to work with DJI drones, and there's this growing concern about the use of DJI drones here because of potential spying and probably not so much of a problem for biodiversity monitoring. On the other hand, if you're monitoring an area where there could be sensitive things, well, I don't know. So it's even a problem here in the US sometimes. And if you don't have, if we want to process lots of data, that takes time, it requires computing resources. If it's a rare species, we want to monitor how we're going to do the machine learning that would enable us to do automatic data processing. So there's a lot of challenges. And those are the kinds of challenges that we want to work with, which obviously goes a lot along how does this even connect to programming languages. And there's some connection to programming languages, but also lots of other things. So what we want for our drone technology is that they should be reliable and safe, but they should also be cheap, of course, because we don't have a lot of money to save animals. We do want them to be automatic, to have AI running, and the drone should go monitor these animals over here. But often when we use AI to instruct somehow, or sometimes it does the right thing, sometimes it does something completely different and unexpected. So we do want this ability to fly beyond the line of sight, but it should also be legal. We do want AI and lots of data processing, but we often operate with a limited data set because we don't have the data set available for these endangered animals. So this then brought me to what I wanted to talk about, which is the WildDrone project, which is my dream project. It took a long time I actually started working on this back in 2018. And the project was granted 2 years ago, and we started hiring PhDs in fall. Now we have 13 PhDs working across 7 different European institutions working together in a network. And this is the thing I really wanted to tell you about, and it's also what I'm using most of my time on now. And if people want to help out with some of the programming language challenges that I promise I'll get to, in this kind of project, on this kind of setting, I think that would be good. And WildDrone is, well, basically, so of course we have the drone flying. The drone is, the role of the drone is then to record various features. First, it could be about the landscape, to know about why are the animals there, and then of course to identification of specific species of animals, counting abundance, also ideally measuring fitness, so how well is the animal doing. That's sometimes just basically the size of the stomach. That's one way of measuring it, although in some animals it's different parts of the body that you have to actually the model to be able to work with. And then of course we want to enable biologists to be in the field to do these observations. It's not like we're going to have drones and AI magically doing everything. This is going to be a tool for biologists who want to investigate things about this. And it's an European project, but with a little bit of funding from UK and Switzerland as well. And a whole bunch of partners that I'm really excited to be working with. Some companies, at the Max Planck Institute, that's one of the world leading places for biology, so I was really excited to get them on board, and a bunch of other good places. And I just want to quickly introduce you to our 2 main field sites that each sort of have different challenges. So one field site is in, so this is Old Pajeta Conservancy. This is in Kenya, just north of Nairobi. It's one of the places in the world where they have the most rhinos. They have 160 rhinos. They also have the 2 last northern white rhinos in the world, both of which are unfortunately female and unable to reproduce. They have a project going where they're trying to recreate the species with in vitro fertilization, and they just have some really promising first results. So maybe in a few years there might be, and then of course the biologists are discussing, is it then really northern white rhinos if it's genetically a northern white rhino but was born with in vitro fertilization and matured inside a black rhino, and that's a whole complex story. But I hope we get them back, and I hope that we get to monitor them, or help monitor them there in the future. Let's see. But I wanted to just quickly, this is a short version of a video we have where we introduce the field site there. I actually have them say a little bit about what it is that they're interested in. So I just want to play that for you.
We are partners in the WildDrone project, and the WildDrone project brings together a consortium of partners to really look at how we can utilize drones in the field of conservation. There are different areas to be explored from a technical aspect, including the ethical aspects of it. And we're proud to be a hosting partner where students would come in and help tackle conservation challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. And we can easily link this and leverage our conservation tech lab to move forward the solutions that would emanate from this project.
So one big thing for me personally, and I have to admit this, is that this is an interdisciplinary project. We're working with biologists, and biologists go on field trips. And so sometimes we have to go with them. And if they go to Africa, we might have to go to, or we've actually gone with them. So that's a nice, interesting experience as well. So that's one of our sites, and we're putting a lot of work into that right at the moment. They have these 160 rhinos that they have to monitor. They monitor them. Rangers go out and find them every 4 days at least to see them, and it's a lot of work and also dangerous work for them, and they would really like drone technology to do that, and in general do many of the things we're talking about as well. They also have this problem in Opajeta. Well, it's actually an interesting place because there are actually also people living there. There are farmers there with cattle, and they have crops growing as well. So the kind of picture you saw before with the elephants going in and destroying crop, that's very much a problem. The elephants also go on to a local runway sometimes and stand there, which can also be a problem. We have lions and cattle that sometimes interact in an unpleasant way. And well, maybe we could use drones to monitor the positions of the lions and give heads-up warnings to the cattle farmers and those kind of things, preventing the conflicts. The other side is in Denmark.
When it comes to the Wadden Sea area, and the Wadden Sea is Denmark, Germany, and Holland, there are a lot of different challenges and a lot of different issues we look into. One challenge is, of course, that humans have an enormous impact on the area. The Wadden Sea area is visited by millions of people every year, and we have, because the area is so vast and so big, you would say, well, there's enough room for everyone there. But the problem is that some places, a lot of humans gather together, and that is a challenge for the environment.
I think this is actually one of the last really untouched places in Denmark, because it's this area where the water comes up and down all the time. It's often flooded, and we have not used it for agriculture yet, and so still they're untouched. And well, again, they would really like to use drones to collect information about where animals moving around, also actually where people moving around, where there's a conflict happening in terms of them getting too close. When the birds are nesting, are people moving too close and disturbing them, and things like that they don't have precise information on. They could send people out, biologists, to walk around and look at the nest, but that also disturbs the animals. If you fly drones of the wrong kind, or fly them too low, it also disturbs the birds. So it's a difficult problem. And I brought these two along because it's actually really important for us to be working not just as computer scientists or drone operators or AI people, but to be working together in an interdisciplinary project where we also work closely together with the biologists. And so the way the project is put together is that we have 5 PhD students who are working in biology, who are doing field studies and coming up, putting together a hypothesis and working with problems in the context of nature conservation, and are then supported by 4 PhDs of respectively drone operations and machine learning and AI, who are working together, and we then get requirements from the biologists, provide technology to them, and working together. And this is my first time running a big, first of all, running a big project like this, and then something interdisciplinary, which is actually both a very rewarding experience, but also very challenging. But it's giving us, I think, a lot of interesting inputs on what are the things that we actually need. A bit later, I'll zoom in on something specific, and then that's when I get back to sort of a programming language thing. We do want to work with something technology that's useful both in Europe, where we might want maybe larger, very reliable drones, so it's good if it's more expensive, but also in the global south, where an expensive sort of first world drone just isn't going to be useful for them. I mean, we could give it to them, but how would you maintain it? How would you keep it running? They need a different kind of drone technology. And we also hope to find out something about what would that kind of drone technology be. So we do want to work with how can we work with the global south. But just having, there's a lot of talk, and I don't know if it's the same here in Europe at the moment, there's a lot of talk of open data and open access, of course, making things, it's taxpayers' money paying for this. So it should all be open. And that's actually really great for working together with people in the global south, because when we collect data, it's easy for us to just share the data with them because, hey, it's open to everyone, in particular you as well. So far that's even working out well. In general, the flow of the project is that we have our PhD candidates who are getting training, and of course the biologists need to learn about drones and needs to learn about AI, and the other way around. We also have the other ones taking courses in nature conservation, go out and do field work, do trials, do experiments, do some internal research reviews, and then communicate about it, publish, and so on. So that's how the flow of the project is. And we have 13 different PhD projects, and I'm not going to tell you about all of them because that would be, exhausting. I'll tell you about just one of them. But we had a small drawing made for each of them to try and visualize it. So these are the biology projects here. So that's both, I talked about this livestock-wildlife interaction. There's also one here on understanding if prey animals react differently to people compared to predators. So that's sort of that's one way of detecting. If they do, that would be a way of detecting if there might be poachers in a given area. We could, of course, also just fly a drone with an IR camera on it and identify people. But we also try to think about what is the kind of technology we want to invent. Do we want to make people tracking drones? Maybe we need people tracking drones to protect the endangered animals. Maybe we don't, but it's gets tricky. Whereas alerting that there might be something there in a different kind of way, that, well, then others might step in and find out what do we really want to do. Another example of this is actually in the drones here. I mean, as you know, drones they make a really annoying sound. It sounds like a huge angry insect. It's like the worst possible sound. And they even used to sometimes scare elephants away from places. So for better or for worse, this works some amount of time. Elephants are smart, so after a while, apparently they figure out that this sound is actually not a bunch of angry bees. It's the human flying thing, and I don't really need to be scared of it after all. So, but animals certainly react to the sound. So we could try and make completely silent drones. But again, completely silent drones that we can't hear might have potential for misuse. So if we wanted an authoritarian regime doing surveillance of people, I think we already now, drone technology we look at what's happening in Ukraine, is already sort of loaded with many different things. So we're thinking, okay, let's try instead to make a drone that people can hear, but that doesn't have so much of an impact on animal sound. So one example could be if we can make the sound biomimetic, such that the drone would sound like some of the insects that are there locally anyway. And if you, just by changing the propellers of a drone, you can modify the sound that it makes. It would not be as efficient, but maybe it's efficient enough, and then with a better sort of sound profile. So those are some of the problems we're working with in terms of the computer vision and AI. We're looking with, for example, getting better tools for classifying images and to do training when when you have a small data set, which is a problem, and also doing 3D reconstructions of habitats. We don't want a massive 3D point cloud for every habitat. There would be too much data. We need abstractions, kind of like there's a tree here, there's a tree here, there's a rock there, and then have some appropriate abstractions for that. So those are the kinds of projects we're working on. There's an extensive website, WildDrone.eu, that tells you in detail about all of them if you're curious. The timeline of the project, well, we are just about, wait, no, we're 24 here. We're just about right here. Here, yeah, 24 and right here. So all the PhD students have been hired. And some of the big things happening is actually next year and the year after. That'll be exciting. So in beginning of 25, it's actually moved back a little bit. We're taking all the PhD students, plus an appropriate selection of other people, to Kenya to try and use their technologies together. And already now they're working on doing examples of things that can be useful. So this is actually really hard for the computer science / drone engineers, because we're asking them to both do their PhD, which has, that has to be a big, interesting, novel result, but also do something that the biologists could actually use in the field already in January next year. And that's tricky. So I hope that's going to work out. I think we'll go there, and then people will see that it's hard to work in the field, and most of it is going to fail horribly, probably. But then we have a second try here when we have the second hackathon. There's a summer school in the middle as well. And then in the meantime, we also hijacked a yearly conference on drones to do a wild drone theme around it. So we're doing nature conservation there. And in general, one of my goals, I'll just be honest about it, is to get more people to work in nature conservation, because we really need it. We also actually begin to work together with a global network that's located or funded here in the US. It's Tanya Berger-Wolf, who's at Ohio State University, is leading some networks, one called Imagomics and another called ABC, something conservation, where we are collaborating on it. We've started to do some grants together, so I hope that works out to get more interaction between it, because, well, we have a big problem and we need everyone who can work on this to work on it, and also maybe do more collaboration later on. It's about interdisciplinary collaboration in the project as well. And so one way we're doing that is, again, having everyone prepare for these trips where we take everyone there together to do some things together, where the biologists will work together with the other ones. So one thing that I learned is, which I hadn't thought about before, didn't know before the project started, is that I thought, well, you can go together for a week and then the biologists will do some study and they'll use the drone technology and the image first, the computer vision stuff. But then the biologist told me, and I actually should have told me before, but I didn't know, we can't actually do anything in a week. You need like 3 or 4 months, because you can't just study something once, you need to study many times to get appropriate data for it. But even so, we managed to put something together where the biologists do examples of what they'd like to be able to do in that week together with the other people. And so the way we are supporting interdisciplinary collaboration is focusing on the use cases from the biologists, and then have the people from drones and computer vision work on that. But of course, it's a two-way street. So the biologists might ask people to do things that are completely unreasonable, like, this thing should work, it doesn't really work, but we'll do some compromise. So that's an ongoing challenge, of course. And there's actually lots of things happening in the project at the moment, lots of work. So I think that we're good and productive. If you want to take a look, before I zoom in on a specific project, which I'll do in a second, we have the webpage where there's links to stuff. We're on Instagram and X, and we have a little bit of stuff on YouTube as well. Hoping to get more. But I promised to talk a little bit at the end, so this is going around in circles, remember, about programming languages. And I'd like to zoom in on theme 2, which is about drones, and talk a little bit about that and programming languages. Now, in theme 2, this is about having drones be safe and flexible. That's to think about the quiet drones. We're looking a lot about how can we make drones easier to deploy for the biologist in the field. But also some simple things like getting permissions to do the flights in Kenya. I think we have a good chance at being almost the only ones who will be able to be allowed to fly at the moment, be with us, because we're working closely together with the Kenyan authorities. We're actually going there again in June, because we have to be there to talk to people. I hope to get permissions for that. The high level objectives there is to have these abilities to do beaverless flights. And basically, the main problem here is actually, you can imagine that someone, a biologist, wants to go in the field and do an experiment, and they might have an idea beforehand, before they go to Africa. This is what I want my drone to do. But then maybe when you're there and you begin observing the animals, you find out, oh, I actually want to do something different. I didn't want to be observing the animals from above. I need shots from the side as well. I actually want not to be tracking a group of animals, but if that's good as a starter. But if the group splits up, what should I do? Should the drone just stay put and be confused, or should it follow the larger group, or maybe a specific animal? So things like that are challenging because you might, if we knew beforehand what they needed, we could probably write an algorithm for that. But here the scenario is that we have someone sitting in the field in the middle of Africa who wants to try something different the day after, because what I did today with the drone just didn't work. And that's one of the projects I'd like to talk about. This is one I'm involved in as well, which is called automated planning. Like a little bit about actually as well. The guy doing all of the work, that's one of my PhD students. We have both a bunch of supervisors, and here are some of the biology PhD students who are then providing requirements to the work that he's doing. One example of what he's doing is for observing animals at the sea, actually. So we have this Vatn Sea area, which is kind of a link to this. But it's actually also, this is very much one of the use cases actually about wind turbines at sea. I don't know, do you do that here in the US? Sea-based wind turbines as well? Do you put them on land?
We have them in the sea, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the thing is, sometimes when you put them at sea, you have to make a decision about where to put them. In Europe, there's a lot of regulations about biodiversity. And sometimes the examples of projects getting, you can't put it actually somewhere where there's a lot of biodiversity. How do you find out if there's a lot of animals there? Well, sometimes you sail out and observe it for a day to see if there's anything there, but that's obviously not very reliable compared to having a drone that could fly out many days over at different times of the year before making a decision about a multi-billion-dollar project like that. But to be able to do this efficiently, we need actually two views on animals to track both the vertical view to see the posture and how well they're doing, the sort of the fitness of the animal. You see it on the size of as it works to some extent for humans as well. It works very much for us, and from above you can actually see it. But to identify them, you can use what's called the dorsal fin. Yeah, the dorsal fins here, and they have sort of unique shapes, and for that you need a side view as well. So you actually need two drones at the same time, which then would mean that these two people there flying drones trying to coordinate, or if you had some automated system to help position the drones right. And this is a sort of a simple example of the kinds of things that we want, where you could imagine someone going in the field and not having thought about this before. Now, thankfully we know, so we can try it out. But you could imagine someone having say, oh, I just want to fly my drone and observe animals. And then you come out in the field and say, oh, to actually be able to identify it for the computer vision algorithm to work, I need the side view as well. How do I get that? Well, then you'd like to go back overnight, reconfigure the way the system is set up, and have the drones automatically position themselves to get overhead and side views as well. That also works in Africa for the same reasons. And we actually see this as a general method, and it's actually hard to do in practice, so it's not done so often at the moment, because it requires two drone pilots who are carefully coordinating what they're doing to get these views. Whereas if we actually had an algorithm that could automatically control the drones, that would give us something more precise, where we would know a lot more about it. It would be easier for the biologists to do, and we'd also have more information about the precise position and more control of it. So that's one example of the kinds of, and of course, it's not hard to do this as a one-shot, but I think the scenario we want to imagine here from a systems programmability point of view, which is what I'm getting at, is suppose we didn't know this in advance, but that we do want this kind of relative positioning of the drones. How would we program that in the middle of Africa for use the next day? Can we do that? Something more complicated even is here we have the herd of cows and the lion. As the lion gets closer, the herd split up, and what we're actually interested is in understanding better the interaction between the predator and the prey. And again, what do we want the drones to be doing? We could want the drones to be, suppose we have, and we want it, and of course, as you know, if we're flying with a multi-rotor here, usually it does run for half an hour before the battery runs out. So one way to sort of work around that is to have the drones work in a team, when one drone runs slow, you send in the next one, so you have drones monitoring them all the time. You could imagine having two sets of 2 drones providing continuous coverage and providing different points of view. When the predation event happens, when lying is too close, the groups might split up and the drones split up and try to follow different groups. Could we imagine this being something that we can program the exact way the drones should be responding to this and observing the animals as it happens dynamically? Could this be something that an end user could program into the system? I don't know, but that's part of what we're looking at here. So this is actually the end of the talk as well, which is thinking about the program language challenges. So how do we represent the mission, what the drones should be doing? Often when drones are working, we just think about geographical waypoints because that's an easy way to tell them what to do. So from a bit cheeky, from a program language point of view, you could think of that like a go-to. And of course, we know go-tos can be harmful. And all too often in robots, we actually do use go-tos in the sense that we say, that's a position, it's a posture, there's something here which is defined numerically, when really there was a semantic intention behind it. But we don't often have that in a program set, but not in a program. So I think we want some higher level of abstraction. I'm sure we need them here. What should those abstractions be? And how do I then sort of create if I'm sitting in the middle of nowhere, I want my programs to do something different the next day. What do I do? How do I do end user programming? Do I write some Python code? I mean, it's a skilled biologist, so they could write Python code if that's what we want them to do. But I'm not convinced that it is. Is it a visual language that we click some blocks together to do this? Is it some more like using ChatGPT to generate some code? And if so, what kind of code should it be generating? I'm sort of betting on having a domain-specific language representation because I like domain-specific languages, so I'm guilty there. But I also think that would be, if we have something, our large language model generate code for us, could generate Python code, but does that Python code do what we want, or does it have some small error embedded in it somewhere? As opposed to generating a domain-specific DSL program, the DSL program should, again, like my safety language, should be something that a human can easily read and look, this is what I wanted to do. These are the steps I want the drones to take. This is the kind of semantics I want from my drone operation. And how do I validate this? I mean, because I could also just send the drones are flying, but if I have 6 drones with me and I did something horribly wrong that causes the 6 drones to crash, then I've lost. I mean, I can't continue my experiments. So I probably want to be able to look at the code, maybe test the simulation. And so that's I think one of the directions we're going here is trying to then define this kind of domain-specific language abstractions for these kinds of drone missions that are used in nature conservation domain. And then there should be something that people can easily understand. Could you use Python syntax for like, it doesn't matter. I don't think I really want it to be Python, but it might be some syntax that I can easily read. Have it generated probably from a text prompting approach, ChatGPT or similar. So that's the PhD project that we're getting into right now. There's the short-term thing, which is just make something that's useful in January, which is to try out some of these things more of a hard-coded way. But we do want to experiment with, and I hope we can do some tests of if we have the biologists there in the field in Kenya, and they want to get some new code, how would they write it? How would they instruct it? So, and that brings me to the end of my talk. I just want to mention, I mean, I still like program languages. I just feel like someone needs to do something about this nature conservation stuff. I think drones are really good for it. And I hope I'll get back to you in a few years with something interesting here in program languages. And that's it.
Thank you. We have some time for questions.
Are you creating digital twins from all the data you're collecting in Kenya? Like, are you trying to do like a simulation kind of analysis, like you doing that?
Well, we are collecting lots of data, but I don't think we can collect data that would allow us to, well, we want some kind of abstract simulations to work with. So yes, in that sense, yes. But I think there's a huge reality gap here in terms of the complexity of the environment. I think I put somewhere we're never going to get static guarantees. Yeah, so DSLs cannot provide, I mean, we're not going to be able to have languages that guarantee that the drones never do something stupid that makes them crash. The world is just too complicated here, the scenario is too complicated. But what we can do is, and that's a good point, is to collect data from, for example, how are the animals moving, what's happening here, to be able to have useful simulations that others could use as well. That might actually be an interesting output of the project to make, I guess, simulations available for others to work on as a sort of solve this problem. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Good, thanks. And it's a good comment actually. Is that we do think about collecting a lot of image data for others to use because we need more data sets here. But we should also be collecting data for the roboticists and the computer scientists to be using for not for the image analysis, but for all the behavioral aspects of what the drone should be doing. Yeah.
The part of the question brings me to my question, which is, for your simulations, are you looking into, like, for example, multi-agent simulations with NetLogo or different mathematical formalism? What kind of tools have you used, and what have your experiences with using them?
That's a very good question. And honestly, I'm still struggling to find the right simulation tools. The small simulation that I showed you before was just something that our student put together, just to try it out and also get a feel for it. I think there's I think our student Edouard will have to make the choice of whether he's going to be going deeper into simulation along the path of getting to something that can be applied in real world, or if he wants to stay with fairly simple simulations and then focus more on the real world experimentation. I do want to see him coming up with something that can be deployed in a real world scenario. And so we tend to use simulation. We haven't done such complex simulations before, but it's getting back to the question as what you asked as well. And I think it's a good point. We've often used basically 3D kinematic and physics-based simulations to have a more realistic notion of how the drones move around. So I think we would tend to use that, but that does not scale so well in terms of having a lot of agents moving around. So I think a middle way of agent-based simulation might be good for us. I think that's a good comment.
I see.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I don't have a precise answer for you because I hadn't thought about it, but I promise you that we will think about it.
Okay, thanks.
Are you using any of those systems yourself, or?
Not right now, but I'm familiar with them because my colleagues at my last when I was an undergrad, developed them and used them.
Might also help. I mean, one of my goals is actually also to create interesting problems that would motivate people to work in nature conservation. And working with more standard simulation platforms might also be a good way of, broadening the interest.
I see.
Good. Thanks. Yeah.
I really liked that as part of the talk. You talked about how you considered the morals. So you didn't want to build something that tracks humans. You didn't want to build something, a drone that's silent, because you thought about the ramifications of that. And I'm just kind of wondering, how ingrained is this in your process of planning? Like, is it an explicit step? Is it just something you thought of last minute and you're like, wait, we shouldn't do that?
That's a very good question. We imply a methodology called value-sensitive design. And so what we've done is to have all the PhD students, the first time we brought everyone together, we taught them about ethics and about ethical engineering. So how, as an engineer, you should think about not just go and try to build things, but think about what it is that you create before you create it. Because once it's created, it's kind of, the genie is out of the box.
Right.
And it's something that they've all done an analysis on in their project, and they thought about, so what are there any sort of capabilities or should I put limitations on my project to reduce the risk of misuse in terms of the technology being used for something I do not want it to be used for. So it is something that, and we're doing it, and I'll see how well it works for the project as a whole. But it's tricky, right? Because if you think about something like privacy of humans, well, an easy way to do that with a drone is to not put a camera on the drone, because then you won't be capturing pictures of people. But if your goal is to count animals, then you need a camera on the thing. Yeah, I mean, there's no getting around it. Then you can do geofencing of when the camera is active, so you would never activate the camera. I mean, there's something low level in the drone that stops the camera from being active unless you are in the kind of area when you can imagine if you're in a city, the camera would not be active and the camera would only be active in other places. It doesn't prevent people's faces from being captured and from a privacy point of view, but it does reduce the risk. So it is something we're working with and we use this fairly well-established methodology of value-sensitive design, where you just think about what are the values you want to have in your system, also the functionality, but also the other things, and then use those to drive a systematic process. But it's really annoying because it does mean sometimes that you make a less good solution, a more limited solution to solve some sort of an ethical dilemma that you would otherwise have in the technology. We always like to build the best possible solution. Yeah. But sometimes that's not the solution we should be building.
Well, I thought it was really creative, right? When you talked about, can we detect when animals, do they act differently when they're in the presence of a predator? I mean, it could even lead to more research, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So it's a very interesting question in biology, but also very useful for us in terms of getting new system capabilities, because it's kind of a new sensor, if you want, for our system, that if we detect animals moving in a certain pattern, we know there might be humans there.
How did you come up with that idea?
That's from one of the biologists.
One biologist.
Frank van Langenwelde from Wageningen University. He has worked with it. So the work he has done, he has shown how you can estimate the presence of a predator from the way prey animals move, even at a long distance.
Wow.
So, for example, the downwind. Sorry?
You don't see the predator at all.
No, not at all. It's like
the prey.
Kilometers, miles away, but you still observe how the prey animals move, and that gives you an approximate location, probabilistic, of course, of the predator in a fairly reliable way. And so that's sort of a next step in his research that we're then supporting in the project here.
Very cool.
Yeah, and this is really one of there's so many interesting biology questions I had never thought about that we then hopefully will be part of solving here. Yeah.
One of the topics that the faculty member here, Mary Shaw, is interested in is called the end user programming, building tools because, as she points out, a lot of people who use computers are not necessarily computer scientists or professional software engineers, but what they do is a kind of programming, like people who make probably arguably the most popular programming languages, Microsoft Excel spreadsheets.
Yes.
But there's not a lot of research on building tools like that are not that allow people to do useful programming like tasks for people who are not software engineers or computer scientists. And to me, this kind of domain with having biologists who need these drones, but they need to be reprogrammable. Like, I want it to go down and look at animals on both sides and specify the high-level task and have it figure out. I think this is a very, very interesting place of research, and I don't know how much your colleagues and your students have looked into the end-user programming.
Not so much, and I don't know. Honestly, I don't know anything about users. I think they're important, but I don't know how to interface to them. So we need help. I think we'll try and go with some simple things there, but it's a new area of research for me. I think domain-specific languages naturally tend to, that's one way to think about end-user programming. So I feel like I have from a programming language point of view, a methodology. I'm used to thinking about what are the kinds of abstractions that we want, but I usually tend to think about it from a, I think the closest we got to before was a safety expert, which I don't think is a normal human. Your average human. Whereas having the biologist in field trying to do things, I think that's going to be super interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't know how. So what we're trying to right now is play with this idea of code generation from text. So using ChatGPT or similar to then generate domain-specific language programs. I think that's our best bet at the moment. But I don't know anything about it, and we need help.
I see.
So any related work or anything people can point me to, I would really appreciate that, because we're really getting in over our heads there.
Okay.
But it's something that's really important for it's way too often that you have there are powerful tools that solve a problem in a specific way, and then the biologists need something slightly different, is what we're seeing. And I think that's an interesting place for us to be here.
I see.
From a program language point of view.
I see. Thank you.
I'm curious how you know when you've succeeded in making a DSL that's human readable. And I also wonder that, if you succeed and people start to be able to read these, is it natural that they'll want to write it and kind of figure out, okay, after I've seen ChatGPT, write it for me a few times, then I can do it myself? Do you think that'll happen, or do you think the people will stick with the chat interface?
So actually, we did we had domain-specific language for the safety of computer vision, where I work with Josh Sunshine.
Oh.
I think maybe you linked us up at one point. I don't remember.
I might have.
Yeah. Anyway, we tried to do a study on the readability of, this was back in, I think, 2014, we started the PhD project. Okay. And I felt like, so how come no one is doing safety for computer vision? Yeah. That seems like such an obvious problem. I felt like, it's like a gold mine for me. I had this really great idea, and apparently no one has done it before. It seems obvious. We can do lots of stuff there, and then we started working on it. And then I found out why no one's doing it, because it's completely impossible. It's a horrible problem to work with, and my poor student, of course, had to suffer through it all. He managed to get a PhD out of it, and we all did some good stuff. One of the papers, however, we did along the way was together with Josh, where we tried to do a systematic study on it. Set up everything with different programs written in different languages, and you answer questions about it, and to see how well people can understand the programs. And in the end, it actually became a paper about how hard it is to do studies for that thing.
Okay.
Is it the perception model? Were you trying to do analyze safety for perception?
Yes, that's what. And then that was the problem we were looking at, and then we want which is a terrible problem. And
I'm aware. No, that's a problem in the whole stack, right? You can do planning, you can do control. All this, for those, there's a concrete notion of safety.
Yes.
But for perception, the input out, you can maybe do robustness if it's a label. But anything beyond that, you don't have a specification to capture.
No.
So that's kind of
actually. So kind of the motivation was, we saw how when people were deploying these systems, sort of maybe a bit naively, you put your convolutional neural network on basically attach it to a camera and see what happens, and you download a pupil detection network, and then you can detect people. What happens then if you drive this for the agricultural robots case? What if there's mud on the lens, or if the sun is shining directly into the lens? Then you don't see anything, so there are no people. At least that's what your network tells you. Mm-hmm. But of course, it's a garbage input image, and then you get garbage out. And so what we did in the end, that was to save my poor PhD student here, was to do something to just work with the first stage. Try and quantify, is the neural net getting reasonable input? Like if the image is all black, or all white, or if there are a couple of other things that sort of, where the image isn't good, it's sort of and there's a whole bunch of other things you can do fairly simple mathematically. And then we did a language to express those in a fairly simple way that would then generate code that would then monitor if the images were of good quality. And if not, then it could at least highlight a high-level controller that don't trust the sensor. I mean, no matter what it tells you, don't trust it. it won't tell you if there are people there or not because you're not getting good quality. And that worked. And then he got his PhD and we moved on. But that language was then the one that we wanted to test for readability to see if people who knew about sort of computer vision from a more mathematical point of view could then read the algorithms we were writing in a good way, comparing that to C++. And you know, if you can't beat C++ in readability, then you've lost. So it's, well, anyway, so I worked a little bit with it, and I think I figured out that I don't know how to do it, and that I need help for doing studies like that. So I'm very humble about it now. So, but anyway, back to your question. So I think readability, I think we've learned a lot more about how to do since then, how to work systematically, empirically with things like that. That's what we need for one of it. And then what they'll actually do, I imagine that if you have your DSL program that's been generated using ChatGPT and you just want to modify a little bit, then it should be the kind of thing that you could just go and modify yourself. Yeah. And how, and I mean, these people write R and Python easily, so I think it's reasonable to expect that they would be able to do that. But I think somehow putting together the larger program to begin with or something more complex, that can be a big threshold to get over, and I think that's where we want to use our AI, generative programming.
Interesting.
Obviously, and it's kind of obvious. So I'm thinking lots of people must be doing it at the moment, but I couldn't find it. I was sort of caught up in this. I did a sort of quick search for literature, and it doesn't seem to be the thing. I think that there's a lot of people who think that large language models are going to mean that we don't need domain-specific languages to generate code anymore. We'll just tell the large language model what we want, and it'll generate our lower-level C code from us. And I think that's a terrible idea, because I would never trust the large language model to not do something weird in some cases. Whereas if it's my abstractions, my code generator that I trust, and then having it generate the high-level representation that goes into a more discipline process afterwards, I would trust that more.
That's actually what they're doing right now. So
okay, perfect.
Yeah, so there's this paper called ChatGPT for robotics, and essentially what they did is that they took the API definition of the system that they were working with, and they provided that as the input to the LLM. And essentially, so now you're not generating C code, but you're actually generating the API code. Okay. And because the mapping from the API code to the low-level controller and the C code is much nicer and obviously much better known. Yeah. So so it is working with a high level of abstraction. It's just then what the level of abstraction is right now. It's still code, just API code. Yeah. Where it could be DSL too. It's just about description.
Yes. But I think that's going in the direction that I'm betting on here with WordPress. What's the name?
So it's the.
You can probably find it.
No, the paper.
I think I found that one.
That's called ChatGPT for robotics.
Okay, I'll look it up. Thanks.
Actually, yeah. So, I mean, I guess we can discuss. I work with AirLab. Do you know about AirLab? At CMU?
No.
AirLab? Yeah. It's in Robotics Institute.
Okay.
So
nice. Okay,
we do a lot of basically wildlife conservation, safety, planning, all sorts of stuff for drones. Nice. So yeah, that's I did share this across that group because I was surprised to see using PL for this kind of stuff. So yeah, we can chat offline.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah, I very much enjoyed it.
All right, well, we kind of turned this into a smaller group for a conversation, which was great, but we should probably go to one-on-ones. So thank you very much again.